Hello and welcome to The People's AI, presented by Vana. Today we have the co-founders of one of my favorite projects in the AI blockchain space, Jason Zhao, the co-founder of Story Protocol, which is looking to revolutionize how the world handles IP, a $61 trillion, yes, trillion dollar market. And I'm proud to partner with Vana to bring you this podcast. Vana's vision is user-owned AI through user-owned data. Vana's mission is to be the world's first open protocol for data sovereignty. And Vana recently unveiled the VRC20 data token standard. You'll find a link to that in the show notes. I am delighted to welcome to the show Jason Zhao, the co-founder of Story Protocol. Now, Story is wildly ambitious and wildly interesting. One of the big challenges of AI is the battle over IP. Who owns what? How do creators get compensated? What's fair use of someone's IP in Gen AI? Story is a blockchain-powered solution for all of that. Now, the name Story suggests it's mostly focused on Hollywood and movies and books and music. And yes, it totally does include all of that in its scope. But as Jason shares in our conversation, it's actually working to solve problems across all IP beyond what you think of as books and movies. That includes DNA and gene data to eventually trademarks and patents. And Story is shipping all the time. There are a ton of different features and updates Jason gets into in this episode. And the Story ecosystem has a collaboration with David Goyer. And if you're a sci-fi nerd like me, you will instantly recognize the name David Goyer as the writer or co-writer of movies like Batman Begins, The Dark Knight. He's the creator of Foundation and The Sandmans. He wrote the original Wesley Snipes Blade trilogy and on and on. He is an icon, a legend in the space, and he is now building an entirely new fictional universe using the Story infrastructure that will have Web3 community storytelling involvements, and people will actually be able to own bits of the Story's IP, all using Story's infrastructure. And we get into that as well. We had a ton of fun in this conversation. It was a blast. So let's jump into it. Please enjoy my conversation with Jason Zhao, the co-founder of Story Protocol. Jason, welcome to The People's AI.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be back and excited to dive deep this time.
Super excited to talk to you. For folks who are truly just tuning in, give us the kind of quick basics of what Story Protocol is, and then we're going to really nerd out in the nuance.
Absolutely. So the high level of Story, first you have to understand IP as an asset class, because that's really what Story is focused on, is improving the market for intellectual property. And IP, just very high level, it's not just what you think about when people normally hear IP. It's not just copyright. It's not just Hollywood movies or Billboard songs, although that is important. It also includes scientific research. It also includes brands and logos like Nike, Louis Vuitton, McDonald's, Apple, some of the most iconic brands around. And so comprised all of that together, the scientific research, the brands, the creativity, that's around a $61 trillion or more asset class. So it's a massive asset. It's so under-recognized. And the reason why it's under-recognized is because even though it's probably the asset we all interact with the most day to day, like every one of us, if we have an Instagram or if we've been playing around with AI, we produce and share and consume IP, but we don't think about it as an asset. The reason why is because it's so inefficient. Imagine if you wanted to create, let's say, like a Darth Vader lunchbox, right? Something trivial. How would you do that as an average person? You would need to go hire a lawyer. So that's at least $10,000, if not more. Very expensive. And then you have to go know someone at Disney. You have to know the right people to talk to. You have to convince them to actually talk to you, which is hard. And then if they do talk to you, you have to negotiate a complex process to get a contract signed so that you can then go and create these lunchboxes. And then after you start distributing these lunchboxes, you need to audit the revenues and make sure that you're passing on the right amount to Disney, and Disney needs to audit you. So you take that 25-step process I just try to simplify, and that's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to do the most trivial thing with IP. And our thesis at Story is that this is a very inefficient market for IP. To use a blockchain analogy, imagine if you had to pay $10,000 to swap 2 tokens on a decentralized exchange. I mean, no one is going to do anything, and you might as well not have those, right, assets. It doesn't really matter to you. And so the idea for Story is to build a solution, to build a global IP repository where everyone can register their IP, set very specific terms on how their intellectual property can be used, and allow those terms to be enforced on every platform that's integrated with Story. So it's your IP, your rules, and you can register once on Story and monetize around the entire internet. That's only becoming more and more important now in the age of AI, when we're starting to see AI is the dominant mode, or soon to be a dominant mode of producing content. We need to make sure that instead of getting into this lawsuit hell, which we're seeing now with OpenAI suing a creator or a creator in Hollywood suing OpenAI, can we actually have a more productive win-win relationship where you can actually say, hey, you know what, you can train on this IP, but you have to share some revenue with me, or you have to, engage in some sort of attribution for my IP. And Story is trying to create this sort of landscape or the market that's much more efficient, much more bottoms up, that allows these kind of interactions to happen and create these win-win situations for both AI model creators as well as the people who hold IP, whose IP is being used. So in summary, that's kind of the big problem that Story is trying to tackle and be in the middle of.
What's so interesting is we've spoken numerous times now. I've covered you guys. I've written about you guys. We've talked on stage. I don't think I've realized until this moment the extent of how large the scope is. I think the examples that I've typically heard you give and read about tend to live in the cluster of the very word of the project, Story, and kind of Hollywood IP, right? And what would you, I think you mentioned pharmaceuticals and potentially media, potentially the IP of this very podcast, potentially every newspaper out there, potentially, almost everything that an IP lawyer would be interested in. What would you say are where's the main volume right now? What other use cases and industries and verticals are you seeing the most kind of friskiness and interest in using Story, besides what we think of as kind of creators and Hollywood type stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, absolutely the case that we are focused on copyright right now, but we are already starting to see people use Story because it's an open protocol. People are using Story in ways that we didn't anticipate, which I think is the very spirit of decentralization.
Absolutely.
So one example is a company called Genobank. And again, we didn't even know this person. They came to our office. We met the founder, really great guy. And he just started, originally was building on Avalanche, and then he started just migrating everything to Story. And what Genobank does is essentially it actually takes people's biological samples. And this is really relevant now in the aftermath of 23andMe shutting down, because people are worried, okay, I just gave this company all of my biological information, my genetic code, and now, I don't know what's going to happen to it. It's probably already been sold. If not, it's certainly going to be sold off in this bankruptcy filing, right? This Chapter 11. And so what Genobank does is actually allows you to register. It allows you to take these tests in a way where they can prove that it's essentially not going to be used, and essentially the data is yours, and you can actually have the proof of your genetic data on chain. And they want to create the most massive, but also decentralized and private, essentially genetic bank, right? Genobank, it's in the name, of people's personal genetic data, and then allow people almost like Story itself to set the terms for how other labs, other services, AI, anyone who wants to use that genetic information can actually do so, and then they can monetize it, right? So this was a completely, we had never thought about this. We really focused on talking to creators and talking to AI companies, so this wasn't on our radar at all. And in fact, the sort of licensing framework that we built really is super focused on copyright right now, but the sort of vision and even the smart contract infrastructure that we built to share royalties was really powerful and suited for this type of use case. So we're already starting to see inbound demand to bring things like genetic data on chain. And over time, actually, we're sort of trying to stretch our legal framework to be able to fit patents and trademarks as well. And so another example I'll give that's not in the realm of copyright, but actually in trademarks, which is brands and logos, is we have an app called Ablo, and they're an incredible app. And essentially, they've done partnerships with Balmain, they've done partnerships with Balenciaga, Polo, and essentially what they do is allow people to use AI to remix fashion brands. So one example with Balmain that they did is they had this blank Balmain shoe, and then you could use generative AI to customize it and paint it however you'd like. And if it got popular enough on social media, they'd actually create the shoe and sell it in Balmain stores, and the revenue could be split through Story. So one example of that that's actually live right now is Crocs. So Crocs, you have those little gibbets that you can put onto the Crocs. Ablo is letting people customize and print gibbets, and it's a licensing deal with Crocs. So all the revenue from that licensing deal is actually being settled on Story as the underlying payment network. And so you're starting to see examples of patents and genetic data, examples of essentially trademarks and brands, in addition to what we've already seen in the realm of traditional Hollywood. And I think we've already had some pretty massive successes there. We were just talking about before the podcast, David Goyer, who's the lead writer behind the Dark Knight trilogy and is now the showrunner of Apple TV's Foundation. He's building a brand new sci-fi universe from scratch, where every character, every spaceship, every single asset in this universe is registered as.
Let's go there now. Yeah, I was dying to ask you about David's project. And it is, as a meta comment here, it is so fun talking to you, because every time we chat, I'm like, oh, they've shipped like 7 new things, like entire ecosystems and infrastructures and apps. So like, I want to get into some details on a few of these things, but yeah, let's start with David. Tell us a bit about kind of the emergence and am I saying this right? Incentian?
Incentian, yeah.
Incentian, yeah. Tell us about kind of what that, at a high level, what Incentian is, and then what can you tease us about what David's cooking up?
Yeah, so absolutely. So David, like I said, legendary creator in Hollywood, guy behind the Dark Knight trilogy.
I'm a huge fan. I will acknowledge my fanboyness. He wrote and directed Blade 3, which I will go to the grave saying is one of the great, like, underrated kind of like sci-fi comic booky films like ever. So yeah, I love you guys.
He really revived like the superhero genre. I mean, making movies about superheroes is kind of back in through David. So huge legend in the space. But if you look at the economics of Hollywood, David, his career is a lot of his biggest successes have been taking existing franchises and bringing them to a new audience, reviving them, right? Putting them back on the map, like he did with Batman. And, on the one hand, that's awesome. But on the other hand, the studios are taking a massive cut. So it's, he's coming up with all these ideas, but then he might get, I don't know the details, but I'm assuming 1% or less than 1% of the upside. So imagine if Mark Zuckerberg, rescued Facebook, right, as a very, shoddily run app and then brought it to life, and he gets 1% of the stock, right? Like that doesn't really make much sense. And so I think, honestly, creators today, they don't have the ability to be entrepreneurs. They don't have the ability to own the upside. They don't have the ability to even own the rights. They're sort of right now being used as labor for these studios. And there are reasons for that. Like, I don't want to say the studios.
And also, it's not usually,
we need alternatives.
It's not often their area of focus, right? Like, what makes someone a brilliant screenwriter might not make like the best CEO, and vice versa, exactly, right? So it's kind of unfair that we're expecting these brilliant creators to also, and now on the side, after you spent like 9 hours sweating out this screenplay today on Tuesday, now go and like hustle and you need to like figure out how to renegotiate whatever. Like, it's almost too high of a bar to clear. So I think it's, as a creator myself, I love the idea of making it easier and having a more equitable system from the jump.
Absolutely. So this is kind of where story comes in, which is now he gets to create his own franchise that he owns from scratch, and he starts with 100% ownership, essentially, right? So he's able to now put all of his ideas, the world's Bible, so to speak. What's canon, what's lore, who are the characters, what's their backstory, what are the different races, what are the different artifacts and planets. All of these it's almost like a Wikipedia for fiction. For every single asset is registered as an IP Lego on story. And then now he's setting the terms. Here's how you can license these ideas, these assets, and create stories around them. So now people can contribute. They can create backstories around the main character. They can create romances. They can tell, of a sort of secret city on this one planet. And then they essentially have the license and the rights to actually do that. And if they generate revenue, let's say someone creates a derivative comic or a podcast that blows up and then generates revenue, then David would get a share. So now you've created economic incentives where you can actually go direct to your community, you can own the upside, and you can share the upside with the community, incentivize them to essentially build on top. So Emergence is the name of this universe that David is building, and he's working with an ecosystem app on story called Incention, which is sort of focused on creating a platform that allows for Emergence to succeed, but also future Emergence universe style IPs that other creators will create to also succeed, to give them sort of this platform where the community can contribute, get licenses, monetize, and then sort of build up a franchise from the ground up together. And the goal is, in the next decade or two, hopefully sooner, it's that the best franchises, the next Harry Potter, the next Marvel, is created in this very like organic lore-like way, as opposed to, Kevin Feige, the guy behind the Marvel universe, kind of sitting in a room and planning the next decade of films, right? And that gets repetitive. So we're trying to pioneer, at least in this specific vertical of story, a brand new way of creating content. And also, just to add one last thing, David is embracing AI. So Hollywood went on strike for almost 6 months in 2023, because one of the big reasons was because of AI and the fear that AI would essentially replace creators. And I think, at the end of the day, AI is inevitable. I used to work at DeepMind. I'm an optimist about AI, but obviously we need to make sure that it's used in the right ways. And so I think what David is doing with emergence and with story is special because he's also been able to set the AI training terms for his assets. And now people are fine tuning on his Worlds Bible, but also everything that's outputted is tracked and also commercialized based on his terms. So he's actually able to go on the offense and let AI increase the total set of people that can contribute to emergence, right? Because now you don't need an art degree to contribute. You don't need to even be that good at writing. You can contribute to this universe if you are interested in it through AI, but then it's done in a way that's sustainable, right? So we're talking about win-win situations with AI and creators. This, I think, is a small example, but an important one of a win-win situation between David and his community, where AI is actually enabling the expansion of his franchise and the participation of his community, as opposed to something to shut down and to fear and to cease and desist left and right, because that's never going to be sustainable.
Absolutely. This makes complete sense to start a project from scratch in this kind of Web3 community collaborative philosophy. Have you guys had conversations with the pre-existing IP, like blue chip brands out there, like let's go there, like a DC, like a Marvel, right? It is. I mean, these are not typically known as being the most like great. Let's lean into like the cutting edge new tech. I mean, there's obviously a lot of they are probably, I'm guessing, more risk adverse, but it's also easy to imagine executives sitting in Marvel land, DC land, saying, "Holy shit, we're sitting on this like literally billions and billions of dollars worth of IP. We can juice this and extract more revenue and profit, but also give something back to the fans by having a tool for them to help create and mix and match." When we spoke months ago on my other podcast, AI Curious, I believe you used the example of J.K. Rowling and said, okay, J.K. Rowling, instead of like imagine if J.K. Rowling, you say, cool, if you want to use Harry Potter and Ron and Voldemort and all the gang and various fan fiction, you can, but I will set the terms and through the story protocol, and she will be compensated whenever you or I or listeners write some wacky Harry Potter, fanfic or do a Harry Potter video. So long-winded way of saying, is that starting to happen, or do you think it could happen of brands and IP that listeners know and love, ranging from Batman to Spider-Man to Harry Potter to Star Wars? Can those kind of enter the story world and start to see this kind of mix of like beloved IP with fan creations that's done in a responsible way that kind of like rewards the original owners of the IP, but still allows for creativity?
This is a great question. So two ways to answer this. One is, when it comes to licensing out the rights, definitely it is much better to go from scratch, because one of the issues isn't even risk, right? One of the issues is, if you take Harry Potter, there's been thousands of licensing deals. And so you want to bring that on chain, but then there's 900 exceptions of, you could license this, but then 10 years ago, like this scarf company has the rights. So one of the issues is not even risk. It's like the actual ability to have this entire genealogy of an IP on chain is really important, right? To use it, we're using 23andMe analogy. It's like, you want to see, if you're creating a derivative work, okay, who are the characters involved? Who created those characters? And then you can track the genealogy of all the remixes and derivatives that led to your story being created. You can't really do that with Harry Potter, because 99.9% of that over the past 2 decades has been done off chain. And I've actually heard from lawyers and execs that work in these massive IP companies that sometimes they don't do licensing deals, and this is all off chain. They don't do licensing deals because it costs them more to audit whether they own the right slice of rights than it does to get the licensing deal done. So just an example, let's say it's a $2 million deal, but it costs $1.5 million to hire the lawyers to go and investigate, the archives from 10 years ago. It's actually really bad status quo, right? So I think we're actually competing against a very inefficient industry in many ways. We're not against, but we're trying to improve it. That being said, we have talked to pretty much every major Hollywood studio. There's been a ton of interest. I think the reason why we really, work closely with Goyer, though, is because we want to show one super big success case, and I think everyone else will come in that way. So the appetite is definitely there. Like people are reaching out to us. They're knocking on our door asking what we can do. But our philosophy is let's show that it can be successful once, and then we can replicate that formula everywhere. So I think, the interest is there. We just have to show that it works. And that's what we're trying to do with emergence. On the other hand, though, there's a whole nother class of assets that I think is also uniquely enabled by blockchain and the liquidity and the global market that blockchains provide, which is what we call IP RWAs. And so RWAs being real world assets, and it's kind of an asset in the blockchain space where you think about putting a treasury bill on chain, like you can get the yield on chain, right? That's kind of where RWAs are today, is like, let's take like treasury bills, let's bring them on chain. I think there's interesting things about that, but at the end of the day, like treasury bills are the most easily accessible asset in the world. And also like once it's on chain, the thing that you can get is just the yield on chain. I think with IP RWAs, you have this $61 trillion asset class. You can bring it on chain, and it's not just that you get the yield on chain, but also you can also get some of the rights as well. So you can actually remix the asset that you own. And we have a protocol and story called Aria. And it's really focused on music right now, but it's already crowdfunded $7 million in 9 minutes. So it was insane demand. We actually had to cap it. $7 million in 9 minutes to acquire BTS songs, entire BTS songs, entire Blackpink songs. We just announced Sabrina Carpenter. There's Dua Lipa on chain. And there's a lot more, Miley Cyrus. So we've acquired a lot of the super top musicians in the world, specific songs in their catalog, like Peaches by Justin Bieber is now on story. So every time there's revenue streamed to those songs from Spotify or Apple Music, some of it goes to holders on story. And then also we own partial rights to the copyright as well. So over time, Aria's goal is to acquire master rights to these songs, where you can bring the entire song, all the yields, but also all the rights on chain. So if you're a fractional owner of this IP RWA, you can actually go and like use this song in AI, right? So I think that's a huge angle that makes it really easy for us to partner with top IPs, is just working with IP RWAs, because there's so much pent up demand from people around the world. Like how else are you can buy a treasury bill on Charles Schwab, but you're not going to buy Justin Bieber's Peaches, right? So I think that's another promising angle that we've seen a lot of success in. That's how we brought on BTS and Blackpink, and it opens the door for deeper collaborations as well.
As an aside, I totally agree with you that and I've written about RWAs a ton for CoinDesk, and it's weird that like I get that T-bills are like the most low-hanging fruit and the easiest thing to kind of port on chain, but also feels like by far and away the least interesting possible use case.
Yes.
Like, oh, instead of having to do this from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., now you can do it 2 a.m. Like, how much demand really is there at 2 a.m? Must buy T-bills. I could kind of wait until 8 a.m. to do this, right? So whereas something like this is a massively different operation that truly unlocks new use cases entirely, and different types of even art can be created, right? So to that point, let's talk a bit about remixing and how that works. So can you, if to the extent someone streams a Miley Cyrus song and someone owns the story protocol, some of the RWA of this IP, I can see how that can be traced back and kind of like, and a holder is rewarded. And let me know if I'm getting this wrong. I'm just trying to understand the basics here. That I get. One thing we talked about in the past is the complexity of how IP right holders and IP rights, when that's fed into an LLM or some kind of AI model, and the output is some kind of like cool Gen AI creation, I'm hoping to understand better how story connects the dots, right? So if I to make it very selfish on my end, I've written a bunch of books. I've wrote a book on Alexander Hamilton, written books on firefighters, on and on, right? If I say, cool, I want my book on firefighters to be part of the story ecosystem, and I get compensated for if my original IP is somehow used. If an AI model, if someone across the world says, hey, tell me about firefighters and maybe write a story where firefighters and Santa Claus have some battle to the death or something bizarre, right? That's a weird story that just came to me. So what would because Gen AI, almost by definition, there's some amount of black boxedness there, alchemy. You're not sure exactly what inputs lead to certain outputs. How does story connect the dots and trace IP once it gets through the kind of rigmarole of Gen AI, if that very mealy mouth question makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And so there's so many different ways to tackle this problem. And I think the best way to start distinguishing different ways you can do it is to think about at what level are you attributing the IP? Are you attributing the IP at the training data level, which is to say all the stuff, the pre-training stuff that goes into these massive models, essentially the entire internet? Are you sort of assessing whether the IP is used in a fine-tuning level, which is fine-tuning being what happens after you take the base foundation model and fine-tune it on a specific segment of data like Picasso art or Studio Ghibli art or what have you? Or are you attributing it at the output level? Maybe you don't care whether it's been trained on Studio Ghibli or not. You only care whether the prompt that the person's asking for literally says Studio Ghibli, right?
Yeah.
Or in the style of Studio Ghibli. So I think that there's varying levels of difficulty. It's very difficult to do proper attribution, and maybe meaningless to do proper attribution on the training data level, because you have just so much training data, right? Like if someone's read the Wikipedia article for or the AI's read the Wikipedia article for firefighter, but you also wrote a book on firefighters. It's like, well, I mean, maybe the knowledge is more from the Wikipedia article, which is
totally.
and
also, there are like 5,000 books that are firefighters. It is already kind of hoovered in. I'm not naive to think, oh, well, mine's special. I'm sure they use the one by Jeff Wilser. You're right. So how the hell that seems like a kind of impossible problem for anyone to solve at the base level.
That level is probably not where we'd start, and that's not where we're focused. Like what we're really focused on is fine-tuning and the output level. So I think that, we've made explorations in both, but fine-tuning, because usually when you fine-tune something, it's because you want to fine-tune it on proprietary data, right? Like if it's already out there on the internet, then you probably don't need to fine-tune. It's probably in the training set. And so when you fine-tune, you're trying to take a base model and then add in some, secret sauce, so to speak, to make it specialized for a specific task, right? And so in that case, usually the IP is much more proprietary. Because it's not in this common crawl, common set. And so in that case, you can actually imagine a market for proprietary IP, where essentially people are essentially creating a fine-tuning market or a model marketplace, where you're targeting what's proprietary and what's actually held by these IP holders, as opposed to the entire internet, where in many ways the cat's already out of the bag, right? So fine-tuning there presents a lot of opportunities, because, I mean, at the end of the day, it is going to be a huge source of differentiation for model companies to be able to create differentiated models, because you have DeepSeek, you have Llama, you have these like amazing open source foundation models that everyone has access to. And so I think that's going to push a lot of the sort of differentiation and moat into the fine-tuning level, which is going to drive up more demand and more scarcity for proprietary IP. And so I think creating a licensing marketplace and focusing on that level of attribution is going to be a lot easier, because it's not like you can just go scan Google and get every single image, from the behind the scenes of Avatar, for example, right? So that's kind of one angle. And then on the output side, I think that's something to explore as well. We haven't done as much there, but I also think it's a lot easier to just have a detection model that says, okay, Studio Ghibli was literally mentioned in the prompt, or Pokemon was literally mentioned in the prompts. In order to go ahead with this generation, Pokemon is charging a 1 cent fee, right? Or a 5 cent fee or whatever, right? And so you can have these microtransactions that essentially at the time of prompting, you can basically make a credible case. Hey, like obviously they're trying to use Studio Ghibli IP, like it literally says Studio Ghibli, and you can charge a microtransaction. And some people say, hey, that adds a lot of friction. That could be true, but then you can imagine that OpenAI could offer a premium plan, which is they already charge you $200 a month. So maybe OpenAI foots that bill and pays Studio Ghibli, and now you have the ability to compensate both the creators and the people who are producing the IP, right, or the model creators and the original IP holders.
That makes total sense. Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned Studio Ghibli a few times. Let's go there now. I think it's a really good concrete example of kind of how the value add story brings. You had a pretty spicy Twitter/X post recently about Studio Ghibli and kind of how the impact to creators. Give us your point of view on that. Kind of like what, also for listeners who have not followed the ins and outs of this, kind of share a bit of what happened with Studio Ghibli and then kind of what was your reaction to that?
Yeah, so what happened with Studio Ghibli recently was really interesting kind of case study. So essentially OpenAI just came out with a new image model, or at least made it available to the public. And now people are able to create high quality images using ChatGPT. And what happened was essentially there was a viral internet trend where everyone started Ghiblifying things, which is to take the very unique Japanese animation style of Studio Ghibli and apply it to essentially photos that they already had, or memes, like, picture of you and your partner, or a picture of, like your profile photo, and just turning it into the style of Ghibli. People are turning every, internet meme format into Ghibli format, things like that. And so I think this is an interesting case study because it shows that, like, it's very difficult to stop people from creating content using AI in a way that uses other IP. And it's not clear that we should try to stop people, because ultimately you cannot play whack-a-mole with the internet, right? Like, and I'm kind of a believer that we should have more creativity, not less. But then it also presents an economic conundrum, which is, okay, yeah, maybe, like, I think a lot of people made a decent argument, which is, yes, Ghibli got a lot of marketing from it. Like, we're talking about Ghibli, you kind of learn what Ghibli is. That's true, but I think there's several reasons why this isn't sustainable. Number one, this only works for Ghibli. Like, every other style afterwards is not going to get the same press attention, right? So yes, if you're Ghibli, like, this might have, like, worked out really well for you and you got a ton of marketing, but, like, it's not like every day we're going to freak out about a new art style, right? And so you're going to have, they're the only beneficiaries.
Also, so real quick to agree with you here, that is kind of from the perspective I come from historically as like a freelance writer, as a journalist. One of the oldest kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? One thing journalists have been told for years and years when they're kind of just starting out is, oh, we're not going to pay you much, or if anything, but hey, free exposure. That's like saying free marketing, right? And that is kind of a fundamentally unfair practice. Yes, someone might get quote unquote exposure from writing some article, or if you're a photographer and your photo is used in the cover of National Geographic, Time Magazine, yes, you do get great exposure. But you know what? You also deserve to get paid actual cash for the work you created, right? So I personally think the argument of free exposure or free marketing is insufficient. I think, yes, that people do get marketing, but there needs to be some kind of just reasonable compensation as well. So fully agree.
Exactly. Right. So yeah, your point is valid. And also I think just, you can't repeat. It's only the first time people care about,
yes,
right? Like,
totally.
who's the 34th person to land on the moon, right? Like Neil Armstrong, right. Buzz Aldrin, we got them down. But like, so yeah, Studio Ghibli is like, Buzz Aldrin or Neil Armstrong. That's great. We all remember them. But like, the people getting their IP used afterwards, it's not going to be such a great outcome. And then another factor is, even for Ghibli, like I do agree, like on net, the marketing is really good for them, but now they've lost control over a brand that they've carefully cultivated. Now, I'm not a Ghibli expert. My understanding is that they produce insanely detailed, insanely high craftsmanship movies in, very, very long intervals. So their style is to manage their brands and only produce things they're really, really proud of and they control. There's brands that don't do that. Like, if you think about like Pudgy Penguins, right? They're great IP, but their goal is to get Pudgy Penguins into as many people's phones as possible. They're publishing content every hour, and that's their style. So if you're a Ghibli, you've just lost control over your brand equity. You've lost entirely how to manage your franchise and your IP. So if you only wanted your IP to show up in high-end, situations or alongside certain people, you've completely lost control over how that's used. And so I think there's a lot of downsides too that we need to address. And we need to think about a sustainable business model that doesn't shut down AI, but also doesn't shut down creators. And right now we're totally over-indexed on, anything that the AI models want, right?
I think you're going here, but I'm curious, what would a world where this same viral trend happen, but under using the story protocol and kind of like in partnership with story? What would that look like? Exactly. And how would that kind of like change the game for Studio Ghibli?
Yeah, so the way that it would have worked on story is Studio Ghibli would have registered their IP on story ahead of time, and essentially all the terms for how those Ghibli assets could be used in AI training would be set on story, right? And so maybe they only have one or two characters, maybe they don't want AI to train on it, right? So there's a world where probably, I would assume, they would just register on story and declare no AI training, right? So in this world, there's two outcomes. One is the AI company actually respects this, which in the EU, they now have to because it's part of the law. So the opt-outs are actually legally binding and enforced. So maybe OpenAI says, okay, we won't train on it. Boom. Okay, so it's like you have an agreement. Someone doesn't want their IP trained on, OpenAI doesn't train on it. So that's kind of a happy outcome. Another outcome is OpenAI doesn't respect this at all, which is totally possible. And now you have a much better legal case, right? Because you've actually declared on-chain, in a public way, in a legal way, I don't want this to be trained on. So you're going to have a lot more protection. This is kind of the idea of copyright too, which is in the US system, at least, you don't need to register your copyright. You get it automatically. But if you do register copyright, if you do say, hey, I created this picture at this time and I've proven it, if you go to court, you can get a lot more back if someone violates your IP than if you didn't register. Because once you're registered, it showed that you actually went through the effort of showing the world and telling the world that you care about your IP. If you didn't register, you still get protection, but much less. You get much less compensation, right? So at the very least, if Studio Ghibli were to be on story, they at least could declare their intentions. And it's very hard to deny that, oh, we just ignored it, right? Like they're going to get more compensations. And then the happy path would be, let's say Studio Ghibli doesn't say no training. Let's say they say, yes, you can train, right? Obviously, again, OpenAI could ignore this and not compensate Studio Ghibli based on the terms they set. But then again, you get the same situation where it's at least more defensible than the status quo because you've declared it. But then if OpenAI does say, okay, look, I'm willing to pay 5 cents or whatever it is that Studio Ghibli wants to charge, then we get back to the conversation about, well, at what level do we attribute this? I'd assume that it's easier to attribute this at the output level. You can make the case very clearly that if someone literally says make an image in the style of Studio Ghibli, that should be 5 cents. It's maybe a little bit harder to say, like, at the training data level, because there's a lot of Japanese anime that looks kind of like Ghibli. So you kind of get this fair use question. So I think that if people are explicitly remarking Studio Ghibli, which is exactly what everyone was doing, right? Like, let's be honest, they weren't saying like, make me a Japanese anime that looks kind of like, so they were saying Studio Ghibli, right? And so I think if it's that explicit, then it's fair to say, hey, this should cost 5 cents and we can come up with a microtransaction model that makes this possible, right? And it doesn't have to be like you pull out your credit card every single time. Like I'm not suggesting, like we figured out how to make internet payments very seamless. So it could be through credits that OpenAI gives you. It could be through a subscription model that OpenAI sets, but in some way, the terms that Studio Ghibli set should be easily sort of enforced. And one way that it can be done is through Story's royalty module. So OpenAI can collect all the royalties from Ghibli and then just essentially send it to a wallet that Ghibli holds on Story, and the wallet would distribute it to everyone who has claims to that revenue based on the licensing agreement on the terms that Ghibli had set. So that's kind of how it would work in the happy path. And of course, it requires OpenAI to comply. But I think even in the worst case scenario, you at least have this ability to say, I've made this declaration, right? Which isn't foolproof. Like we're never going to be able to enforce every single piece of IP out there, but I do think it adds a layer of protection even in the unhappy path.
That's such an intriguing scenario you outline. If you're allowed to comment or react to this, are you guys talking to OpenAI? Have you talked about a partnership? Is that a possibility down the road?
We've talked to folks at OpenAI, but right now it's kind of very early stage, and so it's more about let's prove this model can work in a smaller scale, and then I think the idea is, my understanding of these foundation model companies is, obviously, they're incentivized to get as much IP as they want, but they're also very disincentivized to go into lawsuits. It's just not, no business, no entrepreneur wants to fight legal battles when they're trying to change the world, right? And so I think Sam Altman is not purposely trying to get in these legal battles, and to the extent that he can seamlessly, easily, cheaply pay for IP, he will. And you've seen OpenAI do deals with Reddit. You've seen OpenAI do deals with Fox. They are willing to pay for IP. Like people say, oh, like these foundation model companies will never pay for IP. It's empirically false. There's been tens of millions of dollars paid out to IP holders already. So it's not, it's not to say that they can just do whatever they want. Like they have an appetite to get rid of these legislative issues. It's just much more cost efficient and PR efficient for them. And so I think Story, if it can succeed at scale, will be a no-brainer for them if we can save them time and money.
Love it. As I mentioned earlier, you guys are shipping so often, it's almost hard to catch up. Let's talk about IP Portal. Kind of how does that fit into this larger tapestry you've been describing so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So IP Portal is kind of a reflection of our unique philosophy as a blockchain. When you've seen a lot of blockchains beyond, let's say, Ethereum and Solana, like they build a really amazing piece of technology. It's super fast or it has all these special features. And then the approach that the team takes is essentially, okay, now just, read our docs and build something awesome on it, right? Like build the next app store, build the next iPhone, whatever, like build the next killer app on our blockchain because it's fast and has all these features. I think that I don't think it works. I think you need to really show people why your blockchain is special, and you need to show people the use case. And you need to take ownership over that as an ecosystem and as a team. So that's what we've done. We've built a purpose-built blockchain for IP, but we haven't just stopped at the blockchain level and then kind of, like opened our arms and welcomed the masses in, right? Like there's also work that we need to do to show why this is useful, how it works. And so we've also built our own app on top of the blockchain that's meant to be kind of a portal into the rest of the ecosystem and kind of explain how Story works to a non-technical creator that might want to register their IP and try it out. And so it's a little bit like a GitHub for IP, except instead of targeting developers, it's for creators. And the idea is that, we get questions all the time from creators. How do I use story? Like, how do I benefit from it? And of course, I could point them to an app building on the ecosystem. But in the early days, there's only so many apps. There might not be the perfect app for them, right? If they're a musician and all we're showing them is like visual art apps, then they can't really use that. So the portal is kind of IP agnostic. You can drag and drop any, character file, image file, music file from your laptop and set the terms very seamlessly for how other people can use your IP. And that's registered on Story. Now it's published to basically every single application on Story, and that IP with all of its terms is now available to be used. And someone can create a t-shirt on it about your IP on Ablo and pay you $5. Someone can create a comic book about it using our app Sekai and pay you $1, right? And so now you have the ability to essentially set the rules for how your IP can be used in a seamless like Web2 way, and then essentially publish it everywhere and monetize it everywhere across all our different applications. So it's a really easy way to kind of register IP, see how that process works, get protection for it. And then also the second functionality is that any IP that's registered from any app. So let's say like someone is registering IP from Magma, which is like a Figma for visual artists. Someone creates a work of art there. It's connected to Story. It will show up on the hub. So it also allows you to browse every single asset, no matter where it's created on Story. So it's kind of like a home page for the blockchain, and it makes the ability for creators to protect, license, and monetize their IP everywhere super, super simple.
One thing I've been curious about is if we were like aliens who came down to Earth and had to start from scratch some IP system, like we didn't know it existed. We wanted to create the most intelligent, modern, cleanest, fairest, frictionless IP system. I could very well see that what you're building at Story makes the most sense of what's out there. However, we're in this crazy world where there's all kinds of, you mentioned this wackiness of companies that don't, even if they would want to do the IP or sign some deal, they would spend $500,000 to even find out, oh shit, what did we authorize back in 1987, right? So it's this extremely cumbersome, complicated system we have now. So what I'm wondering is, a lot of what you describe are these new things, the new Story IP portal, right? And David's sci-fi project universe starting from scratch. I think it makes total sense to start there and get some real W's and show some real use cases and show people loving it. That makes total sense. But I know that your ambitions are broader, and you really want to revolutionize the way that you want to revolutionize the way that IP is managed, organized, created, and so on. What will it take? What are the biggest challenges you have to overcome to deal with the realities of the legacy system? What are kind of is it a tech challenge? Is it a regulatory? Is it a communication? Is it frankly a legal battle? Like we don't have the $80 billion it requires. Like what's the what do you see as the biggest obstacles to overcome to make your larger ambition in the mainstream world, the legacy world, to make it a reality?
Yeah, it's a really good point, right? Because we built a system that works in the abstract, but it relies on its legitimacy. It relies on its scale, and I think ultimately those are the two things that are super mission critical for us, is legitimacy and scale. So to go deep into those two, scale is probably easier to explain, which is we're building an IP network. It's like a payment network. So imagine Visa or MasterCard. If you have 3 stores, in one city that use Visa, MasterCard, you might as well just use cash, right? Like it's not useful. But if you have 3 million stores around the US, anywhere you go, it takes a Visa card or MasterCard. That's really powerful. And that's a network effect. That's a great business. That's solving a lot of problems. So right now we're still in the early days. We have a few creators, right? Thousands of creators maybe. And we want to get to millions and hundreds of millions, right? And so part of it is, it's just a cold start problem. Can we get enough IP that's of high quality, that has enough demand to make Story have these network effects, right? And follow Metcalfe's law. That's super non-trivial. So that's one. Step 2 is related, which is legitimacy, which at the end of the day, we're not building a surveillance state. We can't tell, like, I don't know whether you're copying Mickey Mouse, or I'm not like spying on you. So we need to find a way to make this extremely enforceable. And that does mean in some ways partnering with and getting legitimacy with the US Copyright Office, with the World Intellectual Property Office, working with these existing institutions to make Story a system of record and something that is respected, right? So that's another angle. And I think that's similar to stablecoins in some ways, right? Because with stablecoins, they're not trying to like create a new type of money that's never existed. They're trying to take US dollars, which the entire world already runs on, and just make it more efficient. So what Story's trying to do is not, hey, let's create a new legal system and like forget about the old one. It's let's take the existing pen and paper legal system, which is super slow and inefficient, and find a way to make it more effective by virtue of it being on chain. That doesn't mean all the problems are solved. Like having stablecoins doesn't solve the fact that the Fed can print more money, right? Like that is unrelated. And we're not going to solve every problem with copyright, but there are real efficiencies that can be drawn when you have software in place of law and software that is extending the law. So the legitimacy angle is important, and then also the scale angle. I think those two are related. As trust compounds, so does our network, and as our network compounds, so does the trust. So those are two things that are kind of really important in bootstrapping the network.
Makes total sense. And last couple of questions as we wind down: can AI agents use Story? Can it currently and in the future? Will they put AI?
Yes. Yeah. So this is another one of the benefits of having a software-based system is you can start to experiment with like relatively fringe IP transactions. And so we've actually had a few AI agents start licensing IP from Story in order to upgrade their own training sets. So it's almost like, one-shot asset fine-tuning. And so there's been, Zerebro is an example of an agent that's fine-tuned on images of our mascot, Ippy, and actually learned how to produce images of Zerebro and Ippy, right? And so that's been really interesting. And then also it's been registering. It also creates some music, and that music has been registered on Story, so people can actually license it and leverage it. So in some ways, I think for agents, this sort of software-based IP system is the only native IP system they can operate in the same way that people are talking about, you need agents to have crypto because agents can't KYC, they can't get a credit card. So they need a software native money. Well, also agents, if you think about it, like what do agents produce? Well, they're not, most of them aren't robots. They're not actualized in the physical world. So they're producing trading strategies, they're producing music, they're producing IP. So agents are producing IP that should be registered somewhere, and they should be able to trade IP with each other, right? Because at the end of the day, IP is what allows agents to improve. It's a training set and it's training data. So having this agentic economy, I think on like Story being one part of it is really interesting. And I think we're really early for agents. I think the hype is like really way above the reality, but in the same way that you want programmable money for agents, you probably also want programmable IP. And we're starting to see like the earliest innings of that.
And coming from the flip side of that, I suppose there is one concern in the future that a good chunk of creation period will be done from AI, not from humans. I'm guessing if AI agents are creating IP in the Story framework, I'm guessing there is some kind of indicator that this is from an AI agent and not a human. And if so, that would make it possible in the future through Story to say, oh, okay, here we have some blockchain verified way of proving this IP was from a human being, or this IP is from AI. And that could be useful in a world in the future where those lines get very, very blurred.
Yes. So this is a very important problem, and one that we're starting to crack with some well-known teams in the space that are focused on proof of humanity. I think proof of humanity will be a complementary service to Story. So we will check if this wallet that is registering the asset is a human or not. And that's a little different from saying whether the asset registered was made by AI or not, right? Because I can make an AI-generated Studio Ghibli thing and then register in my wallet, and it's like, yeah, I'm a human, but I created this with AI. So that's a very complex problem. But it's one that, we think about Story as having all this important metadata that allows creators to make the right decisions around whether they want to license an asset and also attest to certain things. And certainly whether this was AI created, at least AI registered, is an important one. So we're trying to work with existing proof of humanity protocols who have thought about this for years to kind of augment the Story API with their information and their metadata.
Last question for you. Recognizing the constraints you mentioned as far as the legacy system and how complicated it is, give us a prediction or two of what the world of IP can look like in, let's say, 1 year or 5 years, your choice of if this gets kind of adopted in the way that you hope, if things break the way you want, how could the world of IP look very different 1 or 5 years from now?
Super interesting. So I think that, if things work out in a way that's more IP focused, creator focused, I could see a few different things happening. So first and foremost, I think that we'll see a model, and I don't think it'll be the most successful commercial model, but we'll see a viable, well-known foundation AI model that distributes revenue back to IP holders and incentivizes the provision of training data. So essentially you have a model where people can contribute their own IP, maybe it's name, image, likeness. That's IP that's very hard to find, right? So like, I guess you could go scrape people's Facebook profiles, but essentially like people opting in their name, image, likeness and training a model, and then people using that model, and then some of the revenues being shared with the people who provided data, right? So community-owned models, or sort of using economic incentives to bootstrap a larger, more proprietary training set than could have been available before. I think that'll be one interesting experiment, and if that works, that's a completely new economic model for how to build AI. That's completely in distinction to like the closed source model. So that's one. And then other than that, I think you're just going to start to see essentially agents making money on the IP that they uniquely produce. And so I think there's a few different angles this will happen. One is social media accounts. You're already starting to see influencers that are purely AI driven that are making way more money than human creators. And also, I think that I've talked to a lot of human creators like in the social media world. They're thinking about augmenting their likeness with AI so they can be in multiple places at once and monetize, right? So I think social media has the most digital native creators. They know how internet culture works. They know how to monetize digitally. And they're the ones that are also the most comfortable with AI. So far before Hollywood starts really experimenting with AI, I think you're going to see really interesting monetization and also just creation tactics with social media creators licensing out their image or creating AI likenesses of themselves that extend their IP, right? And then you can kind of license that likeness potentially to use in your ad or your commercial, right? If you want Mr. Beast in your video, maybe there's like a very seamless licensing process because you can use AI likenesses to extend people's image, right? So all you got to do is act out what you want Mr. Beast to do and then slap his face on it, right? And it's like a licensed deepfake essentially. So I think we're going to start to see that business model grow because one of the big problems creators have is they're just one person and it's super labor intensive and they want to build a brand that extends beyond just their one person and their small team. They want to build something that scales. So I think K-pop groups, like can you immortalize a K-pop group? Can you immortalize Asian creators? Like there's going to be so many interesting ways that
co-founders of story protocols, who knows, podcast hosts, co-founders.
we don't even have to be there for
the Jason, next time your digital twin talks to my twin and they'll have a great time. So, exactly. This is great. Thanks so much. And congrats on all of your success. You are absolutely one of the most fun projects to follow along. It's fascinating stuff you guys are building. Thanks again. Looking forward to next time. Take care.
Of course. Thanks, Jeff.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again to Jason Zhao, the co-founder of Story Protocol. And thank you again to my partner, Vana. Vana's vision is for user-owned AI through user-owned data. And their mission is to be the world's first open protocol for data sovereignty. They recently unveiled the VRC20 data token standard, and you can find links to that in the show notes. And thank you finally to you, dear listener. We here at People's AI, we're brand new, so please help us spread the word. Subscribe on the usual podcast platforms, including YouTube, Apple, Spotify, so on. Post on social, rate 5 stars, all that good stuff. Thanks again, and see you next time.